and no testimony, no cross-examination, the lawyers in the room will know the reverence with which Wigmore is cited as legal authority in decisions across the country and for decades. Beyond any doubt, he wrote, the greatest legal engine ever invented for the discovery of truth is cross-examination. Mark Judge is in hiding instead of under subpoena, and that greatest legal engine has been deliberately disabled in this matter. Let me have one example of where investigation might help. Here's Kavanaugh's calendar. Dr. Ford said that Kavanaugh and Judge and PJ and at least one other boy were all at a house. Well, we know Bart Kavanaugh was there because it's his schedule. And here's Judge, and here's PJ. Here are all those three named boys and others at a house together, just as she said. She said Kavanaugh and Judge were drunk and that she had a beer. Skis is brewskis, beer. They were drinking, just as she said. Now, I will concede that the two girls aren't mentioned, but spot me this. If you had just sexually assaulted one of the two girls, would you add the girls' names to your calendar? I doubt it. This may be powerful corroborating evidence that the assault happened, that it happened that day, and that it happened in that place. But with no FBI investigation, we can't tell. That's how you get out of Lindsay's batter's box. You investigate. It's the least thing a sexual assault victim is entitled to when she comes forward. The FBI could interview all the attendees, not just to obtain simple denials, but to cross-check and see if the stories add up. The FBI could see if the house matches the locality and description Dr. Ford gave. The FBI could inquire after and pursue other corroborating or exculpatory evidence. It's what they do. Anybody who has done any serious investigation knows you don't stop just with witness statements of interested parties. You run down corroborating and impeaching evidence. You check and cross-check. You ask and go back again. You do the basic blocking and tackling of investigation. Partisan interviews by political staff predetermined to clear the nominee just aren't the same as real investigators doing real investigation and corroboration. I don't think this has ever happened before in the history of background investigations. closing out the background investigation without investigating new, credible allegations. You cannot tell me Ms. Ford's allegations weren't credible. They were credible enough to get her before the Senate. And yet she was not given the most basic, decent thing that a witness or victim could be given after they come forward: sincere or thorough investigation. Closing out the background investigation without investigating new, credible allegations, not any of 3 allegations, all from women demonstrably in Kavanaugh's social circle. Look at this ridiculous letter from the other alleged assailant in the room. And it's equally ridiculous, yesterday's fig leaf, I guess you'd call it, where the same statement is repeated, just this time with his signature on it. And ask yourself, do you think investigator Kavanaugh would have tolerated letters like this from the third person in the room had there been one with Mr. Clinton and Ms. Lewinsky? Never in a million years. And yet this is what we're supposed to satisfy ourselves with in this matter. It is preposterous to anyone who's ever done serious investigation. Yet this is what we are left with. We have done a botch of an investigation. Over time, I expect the facts come out. They have a way of doing that. Cover-ups never last. The sand is running through Kavanaugh's hourglass. And I pledge whatever I can do to make sure that the truth of his conduct is ultimately determined. Setting aside this botch, we go back to a Supreme Court far too often dancing to the tune of a handful of big Republican special interests. Big Republican special interests funding the Federalist Society that is now picking Supreme Court nominees. Big Republican special interests using the unlimited dark money power the Supreme Court gave them to mount TV ad campaigns for Supreme Court nominees. Big Republican special interests funding frequent flyer amici, so-called friends of the court, offering constant instruction and encouragement to the 5 Republicans on the Supreme Court. And big Republican special interests on the winning side of those 70 5-4 partisan victories, the fruits of their political labor. People are catching on. The record of this is undeniable. And as I said, it will be a disaster for the court. I yield my time.
I think I should try to clarify about the calendar that Senator Whitehouse put up there. The entry has 6 boys listed for July 1st, 1982. It says go to Timmy's house for skis with Judge, Tom, PJ, Bernie, and Squee. Dr. Ford said there were 4 boys there. The calendar entry lists 6 plus Kavanaugh. That's 7. That's the wrong gathering. 2 allegations made by my colleague are incorrect. First, I never terminated an FBI investigation. I didn't have any authority to open or close an FBI investigation. The FBI considers this matter closed. If my colleagues were worried about the partisanship of the investigation, the Democrats could have joined us at every step of the way. However, we all know they declined to participate. Second, we did receive a letter signed by Mark Judge himself under penalty of felony. I read it previously this morning. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's been a lot of talk about the need for an FBI investigation. There are many of us who wish that that's where this would have begun, as it should have begun, as it could have begun had these letters been handed over to the FBI with the request that they be investigated at an earlier time, as early as late July or early August. Well, let's talk for a minute about what would have happened had that occurred. Well, they would have gone to Dr. Ford, and they would have interviewed her, and they would have prepared a report outlining Dr. Ford's allegations. That report would have reflected more or less what we heard yesterday, probably a more distilled version of that, similar to what we saw in her written statements before she appeared before this committee. They would have gone to Judge Kavanaugh. They would have interviewed Judge Kavanaugh. And Judge Kavanaugh would have told us then, as he told us yesterday, that no such event ever occurred, that he never did this to any woman, not in high school, not in college, not before, not after. They would have gone to the other alleged eyewitnesses to this event, including Mark Judge, Patrick Smith, and Leland Kaiser. They would have taken statements from each of them, and those statements would have indicated, as they have each indicated in written statements submitted to this committee, that they recall no such event ever occurring. And so we have investigated. I too wish it had been investigated by the FBI, and had it been investigated by the FBI at the outset, as it could have been, as it should have been, as it would have been when these letters were received, then this could have been handled in a much more dignified manner, in a manner much more respectful to Dr. Ford, in a manner much more respectful to Judge Kavanaugh, and respectful to both of their families, and indeed this entire process. Now, some have mentioned today that there was some emotion in the room yesterday. Yes, certainly. These are emotional circumstances. My heart goes out to both Dr. Ford and her family, and Judge Kavanaugh and his family. They've both been through a lot. I don't blame either one of them for demonstrating some emotion, not for a moment. In the case of Dr. Ford, clearly she's been through something awful. In the case of Judge Kavanaugh, he in recent days has seen, in addition to this allegation, dragging his name into the public record, he's seen his name dragged through the mud on a lot of other things, including an allegation that he was involved in and in effect running a drug distribution and gang rape ring. Now ask yourself the question, if you or someone you love was alleged to have been involved in running something like that, might not you feel a little bit emotional as well? And might not that spill out into your testimony if you were called in front of this committee? Look, we have a job to do here today. Our job yesterday was to hear from Dr. Ford and to hear from Judge Kavanaugh. We've done that. Our job now is to vote. Today, we're going to do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I said at the first day of the first hearing regarding Judge Kavanaugh that this is not normal. It might look normal. You have the nominee, you have the family behind them, you have all the cameras on, but it wasn't normal. It wasn't normal because this nominee was handpicked by a president who, in just the last week, has gone after his attorney general, threatened to fire the deputy attorney general who's overseeing a major investigation, a national security investigation, handpicked by a president who's constantly undermining law enforcement, constantly undermining the FBI. And yet, this president picked a nominee who has the most expansive view of executive power that we've seen. A president, a view of executive power that, according to his writings and even the case law, says, in his own words, in an opinion, that a president should be able to declare laws unconstitutional. In his own views in legal writings, that a president should be able to be immune from investigation while sitting in office, that we shouldn't have a special counsel statute. So that's where we start. That's the core here as we look at the constitutional issues that we're facing. The second reason this isn't normal is that we did not get the information we needed to make a decision. I come from a state that believes in process. In my old job for 8 years, I headed up the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. We handled, by the way, 12,000 juvenile cases every single year. So I saw cases just like the one we heard about yesterday. But in our role, I would always tell people if we had to let a case go, if we had to make a deal that people didn't like, our role was to be ministers of justice. It was to convict the guilty, but also protecting the innocent. And I don't think we protected the innocent very well yesterday, and I certainly don't think that we're doing it today. There was a lot of chest beating that went on yesterday on the other side. And it was pretty effective, I guess, if the goal was to distract the American public for what they had heard in the morning, to distract infecting Dr. Ford, when we are not giving her the respect of having an investigation of the case that she made to us yesterday. It was a while ago that this happened, and there's other claims out there as well. But it's been my experience, as Senator Whitehouse just articulated, that if you don't go back and look at things and you don't look at corroborating evidence and you don't talk to the witnesses, you're never going to know what happened. I have proposed and talked to some of my colleagues, and I know others have as well, as a finite period for an FBI investigation, maybe a week. George H.W. Bush ordered that in the Anita Hill case, a 3-day investigation. That happened. Whether people like that outcome or not, it happened. That is not even happening here. We are not even giving Dr. Ford the respect of having that investigation. And that is wrong. That is not being ministers of justice. This was a woman with no political background who made an attempt to call the front office of her congresswoman. That's what she did. She did this before the nominee was even picked. She did it when the nominee was on a short list because she was concerned. That's what she did. So don't argue that she is part of some massive political strategy. Those aren't the facts. And yes, it's messy. The justice system is messy. Things come in at the last minute. It happens all the time. It happens before a trial. It happens before a hearing. And the question is not if it's messy. Senator Flake himself said yesterday, this is not a good process, but it's all we've got. The question is, what do you do when it happens? When you're in a position of power? What do you do when it happens? You may not like how this came in at the last minute. I would have liked to known about it earlier too, but I didn't. The question is, what do you do when it happens? And when it happens, you don't just put it under the rug. For so many years, this is what happened to claims like this. They were just swept under the rug. What happened in the House, no matter how bad it was, didn't belong in the courthouse. And that hurt women and that hurt children for a long, long time. But the times are changing now. We have someone who made a credible claim. The chairman even thanked her for her bravery. Well, where is the bravery in this room? This rush when in fact we could have a finite period of time to interview a finite period of witnesses, someone who she alleges was in the very room where it happened. We are not able to even cross-examine them, ask them questions. We're not allowing the FBI to go in there and tell him to his face that you're going to get in criminal trouble if you don't answer these questions correctly. Instead, we get a letter behind the veil of a law firm. That's not the same thing. We have a polygraph expert. Yesterday, I put that polygraph exam on the record. People were bristling over there and said, well, we want to see the charts. Well, we would be happy to have the polygraph expert testify and explain how this was verified. And yes, as Judge Kavanaugh pointed out, this is not a test that is admissible in court. But guess what? We use it for job interviews. We use it for the FBI. We use it for the Defense Department. We use it for the CIA. And the nominee himself has even said that this is useful to use for those purposes in a case that he decided in 2016. Those are the kind of witnesses we could hear from if we had the opportunity, maybe 1 week, to do it. So I look at it this way. If we want to show Dr. Ford respect, we give her the respect of having her case heard and the evidence looked at. I look at it as, what are you hiding? What would it hurt? If Judge Kavanaugh is so sure that he has this corroborating evidence and what this calendar means and what these things mean, then what is he afraid of if we just spend 1 week looking at the evidence? What I have heard today just adds to this. When I heard this sanctimonious talk about some kind of a political strategy, well, I'll give you Exhibit A, Merrick Garland, who was delayed for nearly 10 months. You talk about a nominee getting off the floor when all we're asking for is 1 week for an investigation, and you kept Merrick Garland away from this committee for 10 months? That's not even a comparison. That was a strategy yesterday, and boy, was it a strategy. And I sure hope that some of the senators who have not yet made a decision, who are not on this committee, will look at the evidence and look at what happened and see it for the strategy. Look at the evidence and look at what happened and see it for the strategy that it was. I asked Dr. Ford yesterday about what she remembers from that night. And I also asked her what she couldn't forget. And here's what she said. The stairwell, the living room. And here's what she said. The stairwell, the living room, the bedroom, the bed on the right side of the room, the bathroom in close proximity, the laughter, the uproarious laughter, the multiple attempts to escape and the final ability to do so. We heard her talk about how she had a civic duty to bring this up. We heard her testify about how she had actually brought this up 6 years before to a counselor. About how her husband recalls her using the judge's name. In the rules of evidence, it says that statements made to a professional, to a medical professional, are considered to be credible. In cases, when you compare evidence, you look at what their goals are. What would be their reasons to lie? And I look at, you have on one hand a judge who is a career-making moment to get on the United States Supreme Court. And by the way, no one is entitled to be on the United States Supreme Court. And then you have a woman who tried to keep this confidential, who came forward, sent a letter, tried to do what she could to keep her name out of the news, and finally, when the reporters showed up at her door, she came forward. I just see these as different. And when you look at the rules of evidence, when you look at credibility, the fact that she had mentioned this years before means a lot. But lot. But you could have doubters. I understand that. But when we don't have an investigation and we don't have things in writing to be able to look at the facts, where are we? I have been on this committee for a number of years, and I have been briefed on FBI background checks. And a number of times, and my colleagues know this, nominees withdraw because of what is in those background checks. They pull their names out. The press never knows it, but it happens. Or sometimes we're presented with some information that's not public, and we have to make a decision. Well, does this drug use amount to something that should keep this person off the bench? Does looking at this website amount to keeping this person off the bench? These are things we've actually considered. That's the kind of information we get from those background checks. And I think it's a good thing, because not everyone needs to be dragged through the mud. Things are contained in a background check.
Here we have order.
Those background checks are useful for us, and they're useful for the American people. I, for one, don't want to live in an evidence-free zone. We need this information. I would submit to my friends across the aisle that this is not a he said, she said. This is a he said, they said. There are a number of people out there who have talked about the fact, including the nominee's roommate, that he is belligerent when he gets drunk. Yes, that was a long time ago. Maybe he doesn't do that anymore. And I know people in high school drink a lot and in college, but when I asked him about this to try to get to the facts, I'm not an FBI agent, but all I was trying to do was try to figure out, well, maybe he has partially memory loss when he gets that drunk, or maybe he blacks out. I don't know. I was trying to get that. What did I get in response? A question of if I black out. Did he apologize? He did, and I appreciated that. But the point is, if we could have the FBI, like we do with all background checks, interview these witnesses, we could get to the bottom of the facts. Judge Kavanaugh said on Fox News and yesterday that he wants a fair process. That's what he said he wants. And when I asked the judge why he wouldn't ask the president to have the FBI reopen the investigation yesterday, he didn't make that request. He didn't really answer that question. There are only a few people in America right now that can reopen that investigation. The one sitting across the room, because yes, Senator Grassley could have held off this vote until we had that investigation. Judge Kavanaugh could have easily said, Mr. President, for this to move forward, I want to at least clear my name, but mostly I want to have the American people know whether or not this is true or not. He could have done that. Why didn't he do it? Because they're afraid of what they'll find out. Yesterday, the American Bar Association, as Senator Durbin has just noted and read the letter, sent a letter urging the committee not to vote on Judge Kavanaugh's nomination until the FBI has conducted appropriate follow-up. The ABA said that it made that request because of its, quote, respect for the rule of law and due process under law. I'm just waiting until the staff is done talking over there. The ABA said that it made the request because of its respect for the rule of law and due process under the law. I chose to get on this committee. I didn't get on it right away because I'd done this work for 8 years before I got on here. I got on here 2 years after I got to the Senate because I decided I wanted to continue that work, to uphold the respect for the rule of law and due process under the law. But that's not what I saw yesterday. So if this committee isn't going to respect the law, and if we go to the floor and the same thing happens again, I would remind my colleagues that the Constitution does not say we, the ruling party. The Constitution says we, the people. And if the people of this country want to have a check and balance in the Supreme Court, a check and balance on this administration, if they want to have a fair process, they're the only ones left. to pitch in here. They're the only ones left to have a say. Because right now, the way this process is run, we're not running it like we the people. It's being run like we the ruling party. I vote no.
Senator Cruz, we hear about fair and open and thorough and everything that I just heard. We heard the inference of a political strategy on this side of the aisle not to be fair and thorough. I have seared in the back of my mind something that was said soon after July the 9th that Senator Schumer said that tells me about a political strategy that is carried on here the way it has to delay and delay and delay and delay, because he said, I'm going to fight Judge Kavanaugh nomination with everything I've got. And it seems like that has happened over the last 90 days. Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're living in a divided time. This country is divided right down the middle. There is an enormous amount of anger. There's rage. There's hatred. We see demonstrators screaming at each other, reflecting that rage, reflecting that anger. And I know there are a great many Americans who wish we could and believe we can get back to an environment where we treat each other with civility and decency. Get back to an environment where, yes, we have policy disagreements. We disagree on what the right legislation is to pass. And we even have vigorous debates about what the right policy is. But we do so in a context that respects each other, that doesn't demean the humanity of each other, that doesn't attack the character and drag people through the mud. The politics of personal destruction that we have seen on display in recent days is Washington, D.C. at its very ugliest. And all of us should remember that we're talking about real human beings here. These aren't pawns on a chessboard. These are real people. Dr. Ford has been through hell. The last 2 weeks, I have no doubt, have been extraordinarily painful for her family. The testimony she gave yesterday was powerful, was clearly heart-wrenching, was clear she was hurting and hurting mightily. Having her name made public against her wishes and dragged through the mud was a hurtful thing to do. It was the wrong thing to do. And Judge Kavanaugh, he too has been dragged through the mud for the last 2 weeks in a way that has no precedent. In our polarized society we live in today, it's almost tribalized, where half of us wear one team's jersey, the other half wear the other team's jersey, and everything we see through the lens of our jersey. So it would not surprise me if across the country, a significant percentage of those on the Democratic side of the aisle saw yesterday's testimony and concluded he must be guilty. And it would not surprise me if a very significant percentage of those on the Republican side of the aisle saw yesterday's testimony, the same testimony, and concluded he must be innocent. One of the consequences of that, Judge Kavanaugh talked about how these smears and the many that have been leveled against him in the last 2 weeks, how they have, as he put it, destroyed his family. To some, that may sound like hyperbole. I don't think it is. Judge Kavanaugh has 2 young daughters, a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old. For the rest of their lives, their daughters will go to school, will interact with people many of whom are convinced their father is a rapist. I want you to think of the effect that has when those are the allegations. That's where it starts. Not, I disagree with your jurisprudence, not, I think you're wrong in how you interpret the Constitution, but you are, I mean, and look, and let's be clear, he has been accused of, among other things, participating in repeatedly drugging and gang raping women, to take some of the more sensational, I think, ludicrous claims that have been aired. These little girls are going to have classmates of theirs repeat those charges to them. Some of the most poignant testimony yesterday is when Judge Kavanaugh described how he's taught law at Harvard Law School for over a decade. And he said he may never get to teach law again. And that's entirely possible. That's entirely possible, even if Judge Kavanaugh is confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court as a sitting justice in our polarized world. I'm a graduate of the Harvard Law School. I think it is entirely possible. Those on the left would say, we don't want someone we believe is a rapist ever teaching again. He also talked about how much he has loved coaching girls basketball, coaching his daughters in basketball. And he mentioned he may never coach again. That's a very real possible consequence of the mudslinging and irresponsible behavior of the last 2 weeks. It may well be in this tribalized, partisan, divided world that the parents of the other girls say, no, we don't want him as a coach anymore. Our words and actions have consequences. That being said, even though this is a divided time, even though this is a partisan time, I have faith in the American people. I have faith in the American people that we want to be fair-minded. We want to actually assess the facts. We want to actually assess what happens. I think it's important that once these allegations became public, that Dr. Ford was given a full and fair opportunity to tell her story. I emphatically urged my colleagues that was the right thing to do, to give her the opportunity to testify in public, and that it was important that when she testified, she be given an environment that was fair, that was respectful, that she not be demeaned, that she not be attacked, and she wasn't. That was the right thing to do. The committee, once this had been forced to the front pages of the paper, the right thing to do was give her a public forum, and a full public forum, to tell her story. But the right thing also requires, and we saw yesterday, Judge Kavanaugh being given a full and fair opportunity to defend himself. The American people watched that testimony. And you come away with a number of conclusions. Number one, it is clear their testimony is in direct conflict. What they said is directly conflicting. Judge Kavanaugh categorically and unequivocally denied the allegations. So the question is, how do you resolve that discrepancy? How does this committee, how does the United States Senate, how do the American people resolve the discrepancies when you have two witnesses that testify to things diametrically opposed? Well, the only way I know to do, and this is how a court of law operates, this is how most reasonable people operate, is when you have conflicting testimony, you look to, well, what does the rest of the evidence demonstrate? What other evidence is there, and what does the evidence demonstrate? Dr. Ford named 3 fact witnesses who she says were there and could corroborate her story. None of the 3 corroborates her story. Not only do they not corroborate her story, all 3 of the named fact witnesses explicitly refuted her story. And they did so under penalty of perjury. They didn't do so lightly. They didn't just say it. They did so in a context that under the United States Code, they can face up to 5 years in prison if they lied to this committee. So every single fact witness that Dr. Ford named has explicitly disputed her allegations. Now, one of those fact witnesses was Mr. Judge. We've heard a lot of discussions about Mr. Judge a lot of my colleagues saying, why didn't we hear testimony from Mr. Judge? Well, Mr. Judge refused to talk to the committee. He submitted a statement under penalty of perjury, under penalty of felony, but he refused to be interviewed by investigators. It's not complicated to understand why. The public record indicates Mr. Judge has had a very troubled life, that he has battled with addiction for most of his life. We heard testimony yesterday that he's been near death, that he battles with depression, that he's a cancer survivor. He has also been directly accused of multiple felonies. So when committee investigators asked to interview him, he said no. That shouldn't surprise anybody. We had a vote earlier today on subpoenaing Mr. Judge. It's not complicated what would happen if he were subpoenaed. If he came before this committee, any defense lawyer worth his salt would tell Mr. Judge not to testify. Now, I understand politically, the Democratic members of this Senate would very much like to see a man who struggled with addiction most of his life sitting before this committee and pleading the fifth. That would make great theatrics. That would make great political theatrics. It wouldn't help one iota in the search for the truth, but it would make a great public show. And I will say, of the three fact witnesses, the one who I think is most revealing is Leland Kaiser. Ms. Kaiser was close friends with Dr. Ford. Ms. Kaiser had every incentive to back up her story. And instead, Ms. Kaiser, under penalty of perjury, says she doesn't know Judge Kavanaugh, and she has no recollection of any party like the one Dr. Ford describes. Dr. Ford testified yesterday that Ms. Kaiser texted her after submitting that statement to say she was sorry for not backing up her story. I think that indicates powerfully that her incentives, if at all possible, were to back up the story, and yet she didn't feel she could. She had no incentive, no motive to lie, every incentive to agree with Dr. Ford's story, and yet she did not do so. So all three fact witnesses have explicitly disputed the allegations. What other evidence do we have? We have Judge Kavanaugh's calendars. Detailed day-to-day. I have to admit, when the calendars were first released, there were press stories about them. I didn't find that terribly persuasive evidence until Judge Kavanaugh walked through day by day each of the possible days when this was alleged to have happened, and walked through the specific conflicts, how he was out of town for many of the days, how he had conflicts for many of the days. The notion that his calendars were almost like diaries, frankly, I think is kind of odd. That's not something many people do, but it appears to be something both he and his father do. That contemporaneous evidence that he kept in 1982, I'll tell you, in a court of law, that kind of contemporaneous evidence would be powerful. If you're trying to ascertain two conflicting witnesses and which one is telling the truth, you would look for contemporaneous evidence one way or the other. And finally, we know Judge Kavanaugh's impeccable record of decades of public service. He's 53 years old. And prior to 2 weeks ago, there had been no allegations whatsoever of this kind. 6 FBI background checks, detailed, thorough FBI background checks. Nobody raised any claim like this. Now, all of us know from human experience that if someone is a sexual predator, if someone is committing the kind of actions that have been alleged, that it is very rare that they're a one-time offender. That if someone is carrying out this kind of conduct, they typically have a pattern of doing so over and over and over again. We have seen powerful men throughout society, in politics, in journalism, in Hollywood, whose careers have rightly been ended, but they've been ended for a pattern of harassment or abuse that typically extends decades, because when someone behaves like this, they behave like this over and over again. There's no credible indication that that's occurred. Indeed, it's striking that in his 12 years as a federal appellate judge, a majority of his law clerks have been women. That is exceptionally unusual. I do not know of another federal appellate judge for whom that is the case, and I can tell you his law clerks revere him. They hold him in the very highest of respect. His reputation, Judge Kavanaugh's reputation in this town, is of being a Boy Scout, is of being a boring Boy Scout. That's been his reputation for a long time. Now, some might say, well, gosh, in the press there have been these other sensational allegations. We've seen others that have popped up after this one. Well, I thought it was striking in yesterday's hearing that not a single Democratic member of this committee chose to ask about any of the other allegations. I think that indicates how little credibility there is behind those allegations. The one that is the most sensational, by the client of Mr. Avenatti, makes extraordinary claims which apparently our Democratic colleagues are embarrassed to say publicly because they demonstrate that this has become a partisan circus. This is not about substance. This is about smears.
Can I ask the senator if he could sum up? The reason I've done that is because I'd like to give everybody a chance to speak.
This committee has given Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh a full and fair opportunity to lay out their views. And I will say, unfortunately, the conduct of our Democratic colleagues, it's been clear that this has been all about politics, all about delaying this confirmation until after the election, hoping that they win the Senate in the election, and then keeping this Supreme Court seat vacant until 2021. Every Democratic member of this committee, before the confirmation hearing started, said they opposed Judge Kavanaugh, before a single thing started. And not only that, this allegation, the ranking member of this committee had it in writing on July 30th. If on July 30th that had been reported to the committee chairman, this committee has a process to investigate it, that is confidential, that the FBI could have participated in investigating starting back in July 30th. That we could have had a hearing that is closed, that is not dragging either of these individuals through the mud. That's the way this process should have worked. And the testimony yesterday from Dr. Ford is that the only people who had copies of the letter were herself, her lawyers, Representative Eshoo, and the ranking member of this committee. Dr. Ford further testified that neither she nor her lawyers handed the letter over. That leaves the only conclusion possible is that the letter was leaked to the public by either of the two Democratic members of Congress or their staff, or someone else to whom they gave it. If there are only 4 people that have it, and 2 did not give it, then the other 2 are the only possible sources. And that, unfortunately, demonstrates a cynicism, a willingness to smear Dr. Ford if it helps politically delay this nomination. I think we have an obligation to be fair, to be impartial, to listen to the evidence, to weigh the evidence. That's the right thing to do. And that's what I hope this committee does, and that's what I hope the full Senate does.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yesterday was an important and a difficult day, a long day for Dr. Ford, for Judge Kavanaugh, for the Senate Judiciary Committee, for our nation. And I will say briefly at the outset that before yesterday began, I prayed. I prayed for Dr. Ford and her family. I prayed for Judge Kavanaugh. I prayed for our chairman and ranking member. I prayed for our president. I prayed for all who would watch yesterday, who were victims of sexual assault. And I prayed for all who would watch yesterday, uncertain whether we could conduct ourselves respectfully. And I must say, after everything I have heard, I am struck that in the Twitter-fueled smash-mouth politics of our day, we must ask ourselves, what about our conduct? What about our conduct here would encourage anyone to come forward with credible allegations of sexual assault, to seek a nomination to a federal court or other position of trust, or to serve here? And as a result, I tonight will pray for our nation. The burden on this committee was to address, investigate, and resolve reasonable doubts as to credible allegations against the nominee before that. And by that test, this committee has failed. I know we have heard strong words about many of our colleagues. And my predecessor, long-serving senator and former chairman of this committee, Joe Biden, has been quoted by many, and I would say misquoted at times. But I want to share one quote, one thing he said to me when I began my service here, which was, "It is always appropriate to question another senator's policies. It is always appropriate to question another senator's priorities, but it is never appropriate to question another senator's motives." And there has been far too much of that that's happened in this process, in a way that, frankly, will make it very difficult for us to take off our partisan jerseys and at some point get back to the important work of finding solutions to the real challenges facing this country. What I have been searching for in this process is the facts. And I recognize many of my colleagues on the other side do not see it that way. Many of you have questioned the timing of when this allegation surfaced, and you have also said there are not enough facts corroborating Dr. Ford's testimony to ruin a good man. I strongly disagree with both of these points and want to explain briefly why. The first time I learned of Dr. Ford's allegations that Judge Kavanaugh had sexually assaulted her was on September 12th. Ranking Member Feinstein disclosed this highly sensitive information to myself and other Democrats on this committee only after reporters had learned of the letter Dr. Ford had provided her Congresswoman. I don't know how this information leaked. I regret that it did. The decision whether to come forward should have been Dr. Ford's and Dr. Ford's alone. And I cannot rule out that the person who leaked this information had a partisan agenda. But I am certain Ranking Member Feinstein and her staff did not disclose Dr. Ford's account prior to that date because it was not theirs to share. And I think it's regrettable that long-serving, honorable colleagues of hers have questioned her motives. I know since the day that my Democratic colleagues and I learned of these allegations, we've had one consistent request: to allow the FBI to investigate them in a nonpartisan, professional, even-handed manner and deliver their findings to us so that we could reach a conclusion. That same night, Ranking Member Feinstein sent a letter requesting such an investigation. To suggest that Senate staff interviews or letters from lawyers are an adequate substitute for a robust FBI fact-gathering process that we might then weigh is not credible and reflects, sadly, a willful blindness to the dysfunction of our institution. To my colleagues across the aisle, you know me. You know I try to be fair to nominees that come before us, and I respect this process and the humanity of those, even those with whom I passionately disagree. If I were convinced this were nothing more than a partisan hit job designed to take down a good man and hold a position vacant past the election, I would not stand for it. An investigation would be helpful because Dr. Ford's recollection shared with us so powerfully yesterday of her assault were searing but incomplete. Dr. Ford testified credibly about painful memories she's carried with her to this day. The feeling of a hand clasped over her mouth and her not being able to breathe.
We'll never get to them.
The sound of laughter while she was pinned on a bed. The weight of a body on top of hers groping her and the feeling of relief fleeing the house. Dr. Ford testified with 100% certainty that the person who assaulted her was Brett Kavanaugh, whom she knew through multiple acquaintances and had socialized with on multiple occasions. But it is true, as has been widely repeated, that Dr. Ford cannot pinpoint the date or the time of the assault, the exact location, and that she did not tell anyone about that assault at that time. There is not an eyewitness who has been able to provide the details of this, all of which is typical of sexual assault. Many experts have written how common it is for assault survivors to remember some facts with searing clarity, but not others, which has to do with the survival mode that turns on when we experience trauma. The vast majority of sexual assault victims delay disclosing what happened to them or never disclose it at all. One of the most striking things about this hearing for me has been the so far five personal friends, acquaintances, people I've known for years or decades who've conveyed to me their experiences of sexual assault on this phone while this testimony was going on. That suggests that there is an ocean of pain in this nation, not yet fully heard, not yet fully addressed, not yet appropriately resolved. And I, for one, will not countenance the refrain said by too many in response to these allegations by Dr. Ford that it happened too long ago and that in our nation, boys will be boys. We must do better than that, and we must set a better standard than that for our own families and for our future. I worry sincerely about the message we are sending to assault survivors if we plow ahead with this nomination, despite the seriousness of the allegations. And I have conveyed to my friends and colleagues that I had wished we would take a 1 week pause, 1 week only, not to spread this out past the next election, not to pursue some partisan goal, but to allow a professional FBI interview with everyone who may have relevant information, starting, yes, with Mark Judge, who obviously, given the vote of this committee this morning, will not be subpoenaed to appear before us. I'll remind you briefly that many of those who came forward to support Judge Kavanaugh, including my own professor from Yale Law School, Akhil Amar, and an organization I've long belonged to, the American Bar Association, have spoken up to also request a thorough and professional background investigation. I think to ask for a week is not to ask for too much. When Professor Anita Hill came forward, the White House cooperated, and in 4 days, a hearing was put together with 22 witnesses. I think that's what Dr. Ford deserves. I think that's what her bravery deserves. And I think that's what our nation deserves. I will not go through a long point-by-point refutation of what we've just heard from some of my colleagues, but let me simply say a few things about Dr. Ford's testimony. As I've said, she bore the pain of this attack alone for far too long, but her memories did not stay hers alone. Dr. Ford told her now husband in 2002. She told therapists in 2012 and 2013. She told friends in 2013, 2016, 2017, 2018, and has submitted testimony about all of that to this committee. Dr. Ford, when she came forward yesterday, had nothing to gain and a lot to lose. She came forward to testify about her experience of assault, and I'm going to use her words. She said, "I'm here today not because I want to be. I am terrified. I'm here because I believe it is my civic duty to tell you what happened to me while Brett Kavanaugh and I were in high school. Civic duty, to tell the truth." What has always struck me is that Dr. Ford came forward to voice concerns about Judge Kavanaugh before he was nominated. She reached out to her congresswoman anonymously, to the Washington Post tip line as well, when Judge Kavanaugh's name was on the president's short list. She was not lying in wait for an opportune time to make a big reveal to sink a nominee. Rather, she had wanted this information to get to the president before he made his selection so the president could pick someone else.
No.
I wish he had. Judge Kavanaugh yesterday unequivocally denied the allegations against him. But something he said repeatedly, importantly, was not accurate. Over and over again, he testified, and we've just heard it repeated here today, that Dr. Ford's account was refuted by 3 individuals Dr. Ford identified as being present. That's not the case, and Judge Kavanaugh knows it. Not recalling is not the same as refuting. Their statements issued through lawyers say they don't remember the gathering. Of course, none of these 3 people were assaulted that night. For 2 of them, it would have been an unremarkable evening, just another casual summer among friends. And Leland Kaiser says that she believes Dr. Ford's account, a fact not acknowledged by my colleagues or Judge Kavanaugh. I'll also say that in my view, the failure of this committee to subpoena Mark Judge, whom Dr. Ford identified as a witness and participant in her attack, is a failure in this committee's effort to get to the truth. We also have to face the reality. There are additional serious allegations brought in sworn statements by Ms. Ramirez and Ms. Swetnick, who have both asked for an FBI investigation into their claims. Their claims have varying credibility, but deserve to be heard. I wish Judge Kavanaugh would have pointedly supported a short pause for an FBI investigation for the benefit of clearing his own name. But I'll say, as I conclude, there is something much greater in my mind at stake. The fact that Judge Kavanaugh is nominated to the Supreme Court means this is not just about his credibility and the remaining concerns about his credibility that I will carry forward. It's about the court's legitimacy. We're left with the reality that if his nomination goes forward this morning, after testimony full of rage and partisanship and vitriol, but without even a brief pause for nonpartisan investigation into the serious allegations presented, his service may well have an asterisk. Litigants coming to the court will have reason to question the fairness of the institution. And in my view, that is too great a cost to impose on our system of justice in exchange for any one man. It is my hope that my colleagues, those who have not yet decided or declared their decision, will still join in a request to allow the FBI to do its important work and for this committee to allow itself the time to get to the bottom of the remaining allegations. Given the vote this morning, I know that is highly unlikely. I initially announced my opposition to Judge Kavanaugh after our previous round of hearings had concluded. Those hearings began without a declared position by many of my colleagues on this side. In the end, for me, it was Judge Kavanaugh's extreme views on presidential power that I engaged with him vigorously on, and that I believe I engaged with him respectfully on, that determined my vote on him. But for us to proceed today without giving the thoughtful, serious, and thorough investigation of credible allegations before us is for this committee to fail to do its job. I pray that after today, we may yet find a way to work together because our community, our country, and our world deserves no less. Thank you.
I'm going to ask my colleagues on this side of the aisle if, and I'm not going to ask the Democrats to do this, but could we kind of, I've only interrupted Senator Cruz, could we kind of make sure that we keep our remarks a little short so everybody can speak? Senator Kennedy? Okay, I guess I'm wrong. Senator Crapo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will do that. I just wanted to respond first to a number of the comments that have been made about, again, needing the FBI investigation and what the dynamic of what this committee has done is. It's been said that this committee has changed its procedure. This is the first time that it's conducted its business in this way. Again, as I said yesterday, I think that needs to be clarified and corrected. The fact is that when the FBI does its background investigation, it does just that, a background investigation. It talks to people who may have information about the nominee and takes a statement from them, and then delivers its package of investigative information to the White House, which passes it on to the committee, which is the report that this committee receives from the FBI. It's been said that President Bush reopened the FBI investigation when the Anita Hill information came out. My understanding is, and if I'm wrong on this, Mr. Chairman, please correct me, but my understanding is that when you, as the chairman, finally found out about the information, that information also went to the FBI. Perhaps it was the ranking member who gave the information, the letter to the FBI, but the FBI was given the information. Is that correct?
That is correct, and they said to the White House, in the usual way they do, that they considered it closed.
So the 2 points there. First of all, the full letter, unredacted, was given to the FBI, and the FBI did what it does, and I don't know exactly what they did in the Anita Hill case, but did exactly what it usually does, which is to reopen it, if you will, evaluate the letter. And then again, I understand that the FBI then closed it and sent the information to the White House as they did with the previous report before this allegation came up. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman?
The only thing I can verify is that the FBI did what they would usually do, and that they then, and I don't know what that was, and they probably would keep their own internal stuff to themselves, but they sent a cover letter to the White House saying the issue was closed.
So the FBI did look at this. The FBI did whatever it does in its background check activities, and then resent an updated amount of information to the White House, which the White House then forwarded to us. And then the process, which has traditionally been followed in this committee, was followed again. And I believe that immediately the chairman opened up an investigation by this committee. That also is customary practice. And as has been stated yesterday, but I will restate again, our committee investigative staff, which is extensive and well-trained, has legal authorities similar to the types that FBI agents do, such that when they conduct their investigations, the people who are interviewed and those who are reached out to by the committee are under penalty of a felony that could result in 5 years imprisonment if they don't respond honestly and correctly to the questions. Every one of the witnesses that was identified has been reached out to. Now, some comments have been, well, they didn't actually submit themselves to a deposition or to some kind of a court process or something like that. As has already been very well explained by some of our other colleagues, when a witness refuses to testify, the alternative is to try to get a statement from them, which the FBI does or the committee does. And in this case, statements under penalty of felony were obtained from all of the witnesses. So I think the argument here that there was some process followed that was not fair is simply inaccurate. The argument that the process followed was not the same as the committee has followed in the past is also inaccurate. And I think that's very critical. Now, to turn to the issue at hand, yesterday we received hours and hours of testimony from two witnesses, and both of them, frankly, made very strong cases. This committee is under the need to evaluate the testimony that was given and determine how it will judge or rule on on the obligation this committee has to give advice and consent. In that context, I came away believing that there had in fact been a sexual assault in Dr. Ford's past. As has been stated, it was not entirely clear when, where, and all of the circumstances, but there's no doubt in my mind that she truthfully testified that she had a sexual assault, had been assaulted sexually in her past. I have to say, I also listened very carefully to Judge Kavanaugh as he testified, and I felt that the testimony he gave was also honest. He gave, I thought, very strong testimony that he was not there. And so I think that this committee has to face the difficult task of what burden of proof does it apply, what standard does it apply in exercising the advice and consent that it gives. And that's a very difficult thing that each one of us individually needs to face and deal with. As I've said, I don't feel that the evidence shows that Judge Kavanaugh was there that night. I believed his testimony. I believed Dr. Ford's testimony about the sexual assault. And because of that, I will vote yes today to move the nomination forward to the floor.
Mr. Chairman, this has been obviously my first process, my first time through a Supreme Court nomination process. I fought for years to be on this committee. It's the one I wanted to be on as soon as I got to the United States Senate in 2013. I made you aware of that, sir, and the ranking member. And it has been an incredible experience, a lifetime dream to be a part of this committee. And sir, I have a lot of respect for you. Some people have even on my side of the aisle have even criticized me for the affection with which I have for you, sir. You have been a partner. And there's something about the four most senior members of this committee, you all, Senator Hatch, yourself, Senator Grassley, Senator Leahy, Senator Feinstein. In many ways, you all have been anchors in this entire institution to a time where the comedy was deeper and greater, and have resisted in many ways that I find admirable the drift towards tribalism within our country and within this vaunted institution. When a Supreme Court vacancy happened, I was one of those individuals that did not wait long before I announced my intentions to vote against Judge Kavanaugh. And sir, I did it for sincerely and deeply held beliefs. I did it because I felt that this was a person that had made it clear in that entire list of people prepared by the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation that this was a guy that spoke directly towards a view of presidential power, presidential immunities, that in this perilous time where a president is a subject of a criminal investigation, that he was going to protect that president, and said as much. Make sure that the president was above the law and accountability. And sir, I've learned a lot. I'm one of the guys that on this side of the aisle, when my colleagues speak on the other side of the aisle, I listen. I try to give them my full attention. And I don't always agree, but I've learned a lot from my colleagues. And my friendships on the other side of the aisle, my sincere friendships, there's been times during these hearings I've texted back and forth with people on the other side of the aisle. I respect them. And I fought hard during this process. I've given it everything I've got. I've learned that, heck, going back to being a football player, that between the whistles, you fight as hard as you can for what you believe. And if you want to call that partisanship, fine. I've been exuberant in my beliefs, and I've learned a lot through this process. Some of my comments have been referenced numerous times, and I know that I have not been as precise and allowed my comments to be mischaracterized. And I don't blame those people who've mischaracterized some of my comments. I take responsibility and have learned to be more precise. And I talk to these issues and I talk to my values as much as I can. I travel around this country calling for more comedy, calling for us respecting, seeing the dignity of Republicans and Democrats and recognizing as much as I can. And I say it, patriotism is love of country, and you cannot love your country unless you love all your countrymen and women. The goodness and the decency of Republicans and Democrats in this country is self-evident. And we demonize each other in ways that I will be and continue to be an exemplar of trying to get our dialogue to rise to something different, to be a country that sees that we need each other, that there's no Democratic or Republican way to success, there's only an American way. And sir, you know, and I hope, and I've said this to you personally, and I think I've said enough publicly, that in the hardness with which I fight, I mean you no personal insult, but I did say before, and I say now, before Dr. Ford's charges came up, I say very sincerely that I think that the way this process was run was a sham. I used that word, sir. And it was because we were evaluating someone for the highest court in the land with seeing such a small part of his relevant work product. I didn't understand how so much of his writing, approximately 90% of his relevant work product, was not even being seen by this committee and controlled by a process that was so broken, so partisan. And then, sir, I violated the rules that you put forward in this committee, willfully and knowingly, and accepting the consequences of that. And I did so because the documents that were being withheld from the public, I felt the public had a right to know, and they weren't classified. There was no national security issues. And gosh, we disagreed on that, sir, and I locked horns with people across the aisle. And even after all that, I was grateful for the comedy. The gentleman I knocked horns with most said to me, you know what? I was taught to hate the sin, but love the sinner. I really love being on this committee. I love it. From living in Newark, New Jersey, this is where I wanted to be, sir. I wanted to be on a committee that dealt with issues of justice in this country, because I feel that when we swear an oath to liberty and justice for all, I don't think we're there yet as a country. And I have to say now, as I'm sitting here, that I deeply resent this idea that somehow when Dr. Ford came forward, that this dealt with partisanship. This is shifted this debate in this committee and in this country from raw partisanship to something much deeper. I have such respect for the ranking member. And I was in the room when we discussed, literally hours after I was made aware that the letter existed, about what her motivations were. It was a private room, and forgive me for speaking out of turn if the ranking member believes I am, but her entire sense of decency and honor had nothing to do with politics. Politics was not mentioned. Her entire concerns were about the dignity and the humanity and the respect for Dr. Ford. The conversation we had was about the best way to handle the information that was just presented to all of us. I've now been in numerous caucus meetings where politics has not been discussed, where what has been done was some of the most eloquent speeches I've heard in our caucus meetings from my colleagues about issues of sexual assault, issues of rape. I've heard colleagues read letters that had been written not by a Democrat or Republicans, but by Americans who are concerned about this issue. This is not a partisan moment for our country. Back in the early 1990s, I was a student during the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas, during those hearings. And I think there's people on both sides of the aisle that agree that that was dealt with wrong, that the process then did not merit the dignity and decency of the folks involved or of the issue of sexual harassment. But yet that involved multiple hearings, that involved multiple witnesses, that involved the FBI investigation. And yet we still criticize that process. But now we're here today, and we have fallen even far short of what I believed was an inadequate process. Sir, this is not about partisanship. And a lot of folks are trying to make this about whether she was flying to California or not, whether the letter was authorized or released or not, whether the process served her or not. That seems to be stripping away the heroism of Ms. Ford, of Dr. Ford, to come before this committee willingly, even under circumstances that she said herself were not her wishes. She asked for an FBI investigation. She asked for more witnesses. She wasn't given what she asked for, and she still came here and sat before this committee. And what did she say, sir? When someone has the courage to speak to one of the most powerful bodies in the land, what did she say? She shared a raw and visceral and credible, a profoundly powerful testimony with this committee and the world, and she was believable. I believe her. She told us of her indelible memory, using words like seared into her memory, speaking to brain chemistry in a way. She spoke of uproarious laughter of Brett Kavanaugh and Mark Judge being pinned to a bed, being hand over the mouth, fearing for her life, that she was terrified of being raped or accidentally killed. When asked by this committee what level of certainty, this wasn't, I don't know, I'm not 100% sure. She said, I am 100% certain that it was Judge Kavanaugh, consistent with other folks who experience sexual violence. It was seared into her memory. She knows 100%. And that's credible because she knew him. She had interacted with him socially before he attacked her. She didn't need to pick him out of a lineup of teenagers and some random attack. She knew him. Dr. Ford's credible testimony does not stand on its own. It is bolstered by significant corroboration. In 2012, 2013, 2014, 2016, she spoke of it. She told it to 5 people. Long before Judge Kavanaugh was nominated to the Supreme Court, she told multiple people that she had been sexually assaulted as a teenager. In some instances, she identified him specifically by name. In others, she described her attacker as a federal judge. Each of these individuals have provided this committee with their sworn statements attesting to these facts. We could have called those individuals to testify that this was not what I've heard, part of a coordinated attack, something to do with the Clintons and all the other allegations. This is somebody in the early years had talked about Brett Kavanaugh assaulting her. It's not some kind of political attack. This is consistent not only with her statements that have been corroborated, it's consistent what we know about other people who have undergone sexual attacks. And beyond the corroboration of outside witnesses, Dr. Ford's account is also corroborated by independent facts. Facts, not opinions. The fact that Dr. Ford identified Mark Judge and P.J. Smith as others who were friends of Kavanaugh and present at the gathering is corroborated. It's also corroborated in Judge Kavanaugh's own calendar, as we've seen. Judge Kavanaugh documented a gathering on July 1st, 1982 that included Mark Judge, P.J. Smith, and a reference to alcohol. Dr. Ford testified that shortly after the assault, around 6 to 8 weeks later, in her estimation, she ran into Mark Judge at a local grocery store, and that he seemed very uncomfortable to see her. In his book, Wasted, Tales of a Gen X Drunk, Mark Judge described working at a local grocery store in the summer of 1982. It's all consistent. The circumstances surrounding her coming forward to this committee also support her. First, she made contact with elected representatives before Judge Kavanaugh was even nominated. This isn't some political hit job. Before he was even nominated, she came forward with this testimony. Second, she submitted to a lengthy, intrusive, emotional, as she said, polygraph record. We didn't call for the polygraph tester to sit before her so we could question them. The report concluded that she was truthful and now a part of the committee's record. Third, number three, she reportedly called for an FBI investigation into her claims, fully understanding that a false statement to the FBI could subject her to criminal penalties. We all know what it means when you get a call from a committee staffer, or partisan in this case, versus when you get a call from the FBI. Where lying to them is a felony. That is a powerful difference between a committee investigation and an FBI agent interviewing people, chasing after facts, pulling on the loose threads that have been evident in Judge Kavanaugh's record. And fourth, she came forward publicly despite knowing she would face harsh public scrutiny, threats, relentless invasions of privacy, that her life would be forever altered. We've heard a lot about the effect on Judge Kavanaugh, which is real and not exaggerated, but the effect on her as well and what she had to submit to by coming forward and making that courageous testimony. Now, Judge Kavanaugh's testimony, regardless of these allegations, it stands in sharp contrast to Dr. Ford's testimony. First, Judge Kavanaugh has everything to lose should these allegations be fully investigated and proven true. Everything to lose. And that's why I don't think he wants a full investigation. Second, he has given numerous opportunities, time and time again, to call for an FBI investigation, call for an independent investigation to clear his name. But he's refused to do so. If I was in the balance and was being accused of things that I knew were lies, I would be demanding every bit of evidentiary investigation possible. Not just the FBI, I'd be calling for independent investigators. I'd be calling on every loose thread, but he hasn't. He's refused to call for this committee to hear even live testimony from witnesses that could corroborate his story or the doctor's. Third, his testimony and claims regarding his drinking habits and behavior in high school and college beyond have been contradicted by so many people. His statements have just proven to be not true. Judge Kavanaugh's freshman college roommate, James Roach, has said that he was frequently incoherently drunk and that he became aggressive and belligerent when he was drunk. But that's not the only one that said this. Liz Swisher, Judge Kavanaugh's friend from Yale College, to whom he referred to numerous times, said it's not credible for Judge Kavanaugh to say that he has no memory lapses in the nights that he drank to excess. And I'll tell you this, Mr. Chairman, Lynn Brooks, who said she did not want to come forward, another friend from Yale, and showing that this is not partisan, she is a Republican, Mr. Chairman. She did not want to come forward, but last night, after listening to his testimony, was so offended by his lies that this is what his friend from Yale, a registered Republican, said. There is no doubt in my mind that while at Yale, he was a big partier, often drank to excess, and there had to be a number of nights he does not remember. In fact, I was witness to the night he got tapped into his fraternity and was stumbling drunk, and he was in a ridiculous, saying really dumb things. And I can almost guarantee that there is no way that he remembers that night. This is a registered Republican who did not want to come forward until he heard the lies of Judge Kavanaugh. Brooks said last night in an interview that there were multiple emails and texts circulating amongst her classmates about how Kavanaugh was, quote, lying to the Senate Judiciary Committee in his testimony. That's from a Republican who did not want to come forward until she witnessed those lies. Judge Kavanaugh's testimony yesterday also mischaracterizes what 3 other people Dr. Ford indicated were present last night. He told us, as his exonerating evidence, kept mentioning 3 names over and over again. Judge Kavanaugh repeatedly said that 4 people who knew Dr. Ford, who Dr. Ford said were present at the gathering where she was sexually assaulted, said it didn't happen. That's just patently untrue. Mark Judge said, I have no memory of this alleged incident. This is not, it did not happen. P.J. Smith said, he has no knowledge of these allegations. That is not, it did not happen. Leland Kaiser has said through her attorney, she has no recollection of being at a party or gathering where Kavanaugh was present. That is not, it did not happen. In fact, Leland Kaiser has said she believes Dr. Ford. The only person who has denied the event has taken place, who said it did not happen, is Judge Kavanaugh. And so now this is the real point, sir.
Can you, you've gone,
I would like to finish, sir.
You've gone-
I understand that, but may I finish my statement?
okay, I want to ask you a question. You've gone 17 minutes. I got 3 other people who'd like to speak.
Sir, I understand that. I'm going to be closing my comments soon, and I'd like to continue.
Are you willing to let 3 other people speak?
Sir, I want to finish my comments, and you can let whoever speaks speak, sir. That's you're the chairman.
Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chairman, he
And
he can take
Go ahead.
my time as he wishes.
So this nation now is watching, not in a partisan way. We just saw one Republican so offended because she knows Kavanaugh. This is not Democrats and Republicans watching. This is Americans watching right now to see what this body will do. This isn't about politics or partisanship. I will forever remember what Dr. Ford said when she came before us. She said she was performing her civic duty. She wasn't trying to destroy a man. She was a courageous, heroic woman telling her truth of sexual assault and sexual harassment. This is what was done to me, she said. Many of my colleagues yesterday said they found Dr. Ford credible. But to confirm Judge Kavanaugh, you would have to say not only that you don't believe her, Dr. Ford, but that you are so certain this didn't happen that you're willing to force a vote now without any further investigation. At best, this means you think somehow she was confused, that she doesn't really know what happened to her. Even though yesterday she told us that she remembers Brett Kavanaugh covering her mouth, seared into her memory, expressing fear at the time that he might accidentally kill her. She told us details from 2012, 13, 16, and 17, told to her therapist, to her husband. And so this is where we are in the United States of America right now. This is not a partisan moment. This is a moral moment in our nation. We do not have to have this vote today. We can correct from the mistakes of the past in this nation. There are millions of people, men and women, survivors of sexual assault, who are watching this body of powerful people And what will happen? This toxic culture, this pernicious patriarchy in this country has to stop. It's real in this country, and people are suffering. And they're watching this body right now. Children abused, watching what powerful people in religious institutions, how they sweep it aside, deny, attack. People in corporations or news media outlets who were abused and harassed for years. And their testimony, their truth was swept aside, belittled. They were attacked, they were vilified, they were followed by investigators. Millions are watching this body and how we act. Do we rush to a vote? Will we brush aside a credible witness's testimony? Will we belittle and attack credible testimony? Will we ignore credible testimony? Will we listen? Will we believe? In the United States of America right now, there are dark corners of our culture. The Center for Disease Control reports 1 out of every 3 American women, 1 out of 3 American women will experience some form of sexual violence. 1 out of 6 men. 60% of them go unreported. And there are those right now watching this group of powerful people. How will we deal with a privileged man? A seat on the Supreme Court is not an entitlement. Just because you went to Yale Law School or were the captain of your basketball team, this is not, the Supreme Court is not an entitlement. And Mr. Chairman, I'll tell you this is not a court of law. We're not saying that this man is guilty of what he said. The question is do we know enough now to delay this? Or are we going to rush to put someone on the Supreme Court with this cloud hanging over them? I cannot stomach that we are going to move forward, that we are going to say to women across this country, to say to men across this country.
I think that question.
And I'm going to finish.
I think that question you just asked is a good place to stop.
Sir, I will stop with this. I will stop with this with respect for this committee and respect for you. I cannot sit here. I cannot participate in what I know history is going to look back as a dark moment again, in the same way we look back at the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas trials. I cannot participate that. I conclude my remarks, sir. We should not brush aside her comments. We should not belittle her testimony. We should listen to her. We should listen to women. And we should thoroughly investigate this before moving forward. To do any other thing is to diminish the truth, diminish the issue of sexual harassment in this country, and to again relegate ourselves to what I believe is a dark, dark element of our society. So with that, sir, I will leave.
Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In my judgment, there were no winners in this room yesterday. None. All I saw were 2 people, 2 human beings in pain. All of us, in my opinion, including Dr. Kavanaugh, or Dr. Ford rather, and Judge Kavanaugh, have a blinkered perspective. Whatever happened 40 years ago. And that's just a fact. I don't know what happened to Dr. Ford. I don't know if we'll ever know what happened to Dr. Ford. I do believe that something very, very, very bad happened to Dr. Ford, and I am very sorry. But I do not believe that Judge Brett Kavanaugh was involved. And that's why I will support his nomination. Now let me talk about something that I'm a little more certain of. And I will be brief, Mr. Chairman. This has been, as someone put it in an article this morning, a grotesque carnival. In my opinion, this has been an intergalactic freak show. As far as I'm concerned, Congress has hit rock bottom and started to dig. And all of this could have been avoided. Every bit of it. The other thing I'm certain of is that these cynical games, this character assassination, has damaged Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh and their families irreparably. And it could have been avoided. Now, Senator Feinstein talked about this earlier, and she's right. How we treat women in America does matter. This is no country for creepy old men or young men or middle-aged men. But this is no country at all, in my opinion, at least not the kind of country I want to live in, without due process. Both the accuser and the accused are entitled to respect and fairness, and yes, to due process. To the person who leaked Dr. Ford's letter, to the person who breached Dr. Ford's anonymity, and to the person who did not tell her she could have avoided this by testifying privately in her home in California. You know who you are. You should bow your head in shame, in my opinion, and you should hide your head in a bag every day for the rest of your natural life. And you also ought to read something. I don't know if you believe in God or if you read the Bible, but there's wisdom in a passage, whether you read the Bible or believe in God or not. And I'd refer you to Matthew 16:26. For what is a person profited? For what is a person profited if he gains the whole world and he loses his soul? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
These, till the fall of the gavel.
Mr. Chairman,
You yielded your time, you told me.
I yielded part of my time to Senator Booker. Do I have any left?
You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'll yield my time to him, Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate that graciousness, and I hope it is a sign that we will rebuild across the aisle. Yesterday, there were words spoken, and we know in families that words are spoken in anger and sometimes in the moment that we later walk back. Those words yesterday from members across the aisle to this side were extraordinary for a confirmation hearing, and I know they would say that some of our words to them may be on the same level, but we have worked together, we've traveled together, we have a responsibility together to do the business of the United States Senate. And Mr. Chairman, I know you may not agree with me, but I think in the spirit of working together, a delay in this vote would be appropriate. I'm here to make a last appeal that we avoid a rush to judgment with great respect for your position. The session yesterday was a job interview. And it's a job interview for a position unlike any other. I have tremendous reverence for the United States Supreme Court. I was a law clerk there. I've argued 4 cases there. I've spent most of my career in the courts. And my belief is that this decision on how to vote, and I will vote no, is among the most important that I will make as a United States Senator. The United States of America deserves not just a good nominee, but the best person for the job. And the person that we saw come before us yesterday was filled with such rancor and animus, such anger, that I cannot accept that he would be an impartial and objective justice on the United States Supreme Court. To describe members of this committee as a left-wing conspiracy, to threaten, literally to threaten United States senators, I simply cannot accept. We are interviewing, or we were, Judge Kavanaugh for a position that is a lifetime appointment to the highest court in the land. He cannot be removed except through impeachment, and he will be there for decades to come. I made no secret of my opposition to him based on his out-of-the-mainstream views and judicial philosophy, his apparent goal to chip away, if not overturn, Roe v. Wade and the guarantees that allow women to decide when and whether they become pregnant and have children, the decision by millions of Americans to marry the person they love, consumer rights, workers' rights, the powers of the president, which I think would become an imperial presidency if he becomes a justice on the Supreme Court. But yesterday, my opposition solidified because of temperament and fitness, which I believe he lacks. By virtue of the screed that he sat here and gave us, his views still are disqualifying for me, but his character and fitness ought to be a reason for everyone to vote no. We saw a witness yesterday of an entirely different character and temperament, a woman who told us her story in steady, even, helpful terms, a story that was deeply painful for her, and she has endured threats and public assassination, character assassination, public shaming, that no one should have to suffer. My heart goes out to her as well as to Judge Kavanaugh's family. These kinds of vile comments or threats have no place in our public discourse. She has every reason to remain silent and no incentive personally to come forward except to do a public service for the nation, as she stated.
$400,000 in the GoFundMe page.
And her story was powerful, compelling, personal. I believe her. I have to disbelieve an angry and defiant man whose story simply does not hold up. He claimed that the FBI had already investigated him because they did a background check 6 times. The FBI never investigated Dr. Blasey Ford's allegations. It never investigated Deborah Ramirez's allegations. It never investigated Julie Swetnick's allegations. Those are gaps in our work that remain to be done. In fact, the ABA issued a statement this morning supporting an FBI investigation into Judge Kavanaugh. According to one of our colleagues, the ABA's rating is the gold standard. The committee investigators may be conscientious and dedicated, but they are simply no substitute for the trained professionals with the expertise and experience of FBI agents. A person who is innocent would want the FBI to investigate their claims and clear their name. Judge Kavanaugh refused to make that request. Dr. Blasey Ford did so. The question is, what is he hiding? What is the administration concealing? Why have we not received those millions of pages of documents that remain hidden? Why has Judge Kavanaugh not taken a polygraph? He says they're not reliable, and that the polygraph Dr. Ford subjected herself to was meaningless. She passed it. As a judge on the DC Circuit, Judge Kavanaugh ruled that they are, in fact, meaningful. He wrote, quote, law enforcement agencies use polygraphs to test the credibility of witnesses and criminal defendants. Refusing to take a polygraph, Judge Kavanaugh has failed that test. Judge Kavanaugh claimed that all 4 witnesses Dr. Blasey Ford identified as being present at the party have said that the sexual assault, quote, didn't happen. Only one person had said the sexual assault didn't happen, Brett Kavanaugh. The other 3 partygoers Dr. Blasey Ford identified said they do not remember the incident. That is a big difference. Do not recall is a different statement than it didn't happen. And the other woman Dr. Blasey Ford named, who was there, has since publicly stated that she believes Dr. Blasey Ford's account. Judge Kavanaugh tried to give himself an alibi, making it sound like he didn't drink on weeknights. His own high school calendar, which he provided the committee as evidence, contradicts that statement. During the hearing, in an exchange with my colleague, Senator Booker, Judge Kavanaugh admitted that one of the entries on his calendar from a Thursday signified that he went to a friend's house to drink. He said repeatedly that he never in his life drank so much that he couldn't remember. Numerous people who spent considerable time with him during the hearing in high school, during his high school, college, and law school years, confirmed that he frequently drank to excess and sometimes became belligerent. Finally, Judge Kavanaugh claimed that he has always treated women with dignity and respect. His words. Yet he and his high school friends named one of my constituents, Renata Dolphin, in their yearbook pages, saying they were her alumnus, reducing her to a sexual conquest. That is no way to treat women with dignity and respect. In fact, she attested to the pain that it has caused her. He would have us believe that these brave, courageous sexual assault survivors have come forward as part of a vast right-wing conspiracy. How insulting to them to say that they are pawns or puppets of us or anyone else. In fact, they are brave, courageous, independent women who have stepped forward. And so I want to say in conclusion to the men of America, for you, I hope this will be a teaching moment, not to denigrate anyone who has been a survivor of sexual assault, but to lift them up. I want to enter into the record the stories of a number of constituents of mine whose pain, sadness, shame, self-doubt, guilt, fear are powerfully attested to in these statements, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered.
They are the heroes here. Dr. Blasey Ford is a profile in courage. And I want to say to her sons, you should be proud of your mother. You should be proud of your mom. She is a profile in courage, and her name will be in the history books long after ours are gone. She will be remembered as someone who stepped forward truly to speak truth to power. We use that phrase a lot. She did it yesterday. And I am proud to say that I believe Dr. Blasey Ford, and I hope that her two sons and her husband
I'm gonna stop the video
are
and
as
restart
proud
the
of
third
her
part.
as we should be.